Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today. We are excited to have you here as part of our Pathlock Innovation Series today. There are several sessions coming up today, and I'm going to put a little link in the chat. So if anyone would like to look at the schedule of events today, you can register for any sessions that you haven't already registered for or look at the upcoming days. Our session right now is what considerations should you make when thinking about moving to S/4HANA and SAP RISE? Our presenters today are from SAP. It's Aaron Hughes and Peter Creel. They'll introduce themselves in just a moment, but I'd first like to go over just a few housekeeping items. The first thing is everyone right now is on mute and will be throughout the presentation. And so if you have any questions, please add them into the question box, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of the session, and we will answer those questions at that time. If you have any audio issues, please go to your control panel, and there should be a place to click the play button. You go to preferences and then audio, and you can find it there to see if your audio is working. And with that, I will just turn it over to Aaron and Peter for their presentation.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Aaron Hughes. I'm a cybersecurity solution advisor with SAP, and what that means is, generally speaking, I help customers find answers to three big questions, I guess really more like three big topic areas. So one is, how does SAP as a cloud service provider secure customer data when you're working with SAP? The second is, how do you as a customer secure specific SAP applications? And today we'll be talking mostly about SAP S/4HANA. And then third is, what are some of the solutions that SAP offers to help customers manage the process and different areas of security, risk, and compliance. And Pete's going to talk more about that. But Pete, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Great, thanks, Aaron. So hi, everybody. Pete Creel. I'm part of what SAP refers to as our North American Finance and Risk Center of Excellence. I focus on the latter, the risk side. So I've been with SAP for about 15 years in the GRC and security space. But I'll be, like Aaron mentioned, talking more on solutions that we have that can help our customers make that move. So Aaron, back to you. I'm going to have you go over the agenda.
Okay, great. So we're going to focus on three things today. One is really roles and responsibilities in RISE with SAP, and really more of a what is RISE with SAP, and what are some of the security considerations that you as a customer should be thinking about when moving to RISE, given that there are cloud components as well as S/4HANA components, some of those things that SAP or hyperscaler will be taking the management of, and that some as you as a customer will continue to take the management of. So giving you an overview of those roles and responsibilities, and then also when it comes to the SAP side of the house, how can you have confidence that we are doing the things that we should be doing to actually protect customer data. The second piece of the agenda is key security and control considerations when moving to S/4HANA. So as you're going through your project planning, what are some of the key items that you want to make sure that you're considering, whether you are going into a new implementation, if you will, or just the I guess famous term is lift and shift, because either way, there are some things that you need to consider from an application security perspective. And then third are the solutions for managing security and compliance. And I'm going to pass it back to Pete when we get to that section to walk you through some of the solutions that SAP offers in conjunction with our partners to help you manage those different efforts that you have. So Pete, if you can go to the next slide. The next one, actually. So RISE with SAP, we'll start with just a quick reminder or I guess overview for those of you that may not be familiar with what RISE with SAP is. So we all know that technology innovations provide companies with new opportunities for value creation, but we also know that cloud has huge potential, but most companies are really only scratching the surface today. And a stat that I hear all the time, and maybe you have too, and if you have, don't ding me for maybe getting the years wrong, but from something like 1954 or 1955 to around 2010, it used to take Fortune 500 companies an average of 20 years to reach $1 billion valuation. And today, a lot of the digital startups are able to do that in 4 years. And that's a pretty insane evolution if you think about it. But it doesn't just happen from advances in technology alone. It really requires change, and not just in the everyday sense. We're talking about real digital transformation while the plane is in flight, if you will. It also requires operational efficiencies, and not just in the traditional sense where we're looking to automate things we're doing today. It's really operational transformation, the ability to create new revenue streams with innovation, new business models. But obviously, this is easier said than done, and it requires a combination of tactics to actually deliver on. And so this is where RISE with SAP comes in. And this slide just walks you through some of the pillars of RISE, which is RISE is a cloud ERP with S/4HANA and industry best practices. It's coupled with analytics, some business process management, and a business network. And then the technology platform that is optimized for SAP applications in the cloud. And this is a bundle, and for you, those of you that are involved within the buying aspect of this, it is all under one contract, which I know makes a lot of our SAP customers happy. But Pete, if you can go to the next slide, we want to look at what this means when it comes to security. So it means a few things. It means taking landscapes that perhaps have a variety of older technologies, older releases, and then moving to standardize them on S/4HANA in the cloud. That means enhancing some of your security measures through reduction of customizations and insecure integrations, perhaps. And then to go for those of you in a buyer or purchasing role, doing so on one of those, that single contract, not just for the applications themselves, but also considering the security measures and resiliency components. And I should caveat that there are RISE offerings where customers are doing this with their existing ERP environments, but the majority are doing so with S/4HANA. And as such, that's what we're really going to focus on here today. But when we talk to customers about this, and especially existing SAP customers, there's a few big rocks as it relates to security and compliance that repeatedly come up. So if you take a look over here on the right-hand side of the slide, we have a high-level depiction of the technology stack. And when it's a customer's to manage on-premise, it's theirs end-to-end. SAP provides the software, security features, functionality, and some best practices. And it's a customer's to determine how to adopt and secure the environment from there. But when we shift to the cloud, those responsibilities change. So in its simplest form, SAP takes on management of the overall infrastructure layer, and the customer is primarily responsible for the application layer. But this raises the question, or it should in your mind, how do we know that SAP has the right people and security and data protection measures in place to give us confidence in the ability to do this? And the second question that also comes up is, when we move to S/4HANA, what are some of the changes that we need to know about to really, again, incorporate into our project planning so that we're addressing things that impact our application security and compliance measures? So Pete, if you can go to the next slide. So on this slide, we'll touch on the SAP side, which we address through a combination of measures. The first is through contracts, as you can imagine, which are a number of documents, but specifically the data processing agreement with technical and organizational measures that SAP implements to adequately protect personal data and tell you how we're doing so. The second is evidence through independent audits. So to give you a sense of scale here, SAP employs more than 1,700 controls across the security landscape and is regularly engaged in more than 130 internal and external audits globally. Now, these audits support ISO certifications or SOC reports or PCI and other industry requirements, as well as some regional audits that are required by customers in certain areas of the world. And as you can imagine, this is a huge effort, but this should also provide some confidence in understanding the extent to which we are regularly reviewed by third parties. The third component here is a cyber defense strategy. This includes our Cyber Fusion Center, which is an integrated strategy integrating cyber threat intelligence, security, technology, and operations and response. And this really drives a lot of the proactive actions and defensive actions that protect the different pieces of critical technology and assets, of which there are a lot of them. We're actually managing over 10 million assets on a continual basis. And then finally, in a secure model and a secure architecture. Pete, if you can go to the next slide. This is all built on an information security management system that's based on a variety of industry standards, starting with ISO 27000. I'm not going to go through each of these components, but I wanted to highlight two things that you should take away here. One is our approach considers best practices across industry standards and frameworks, including, as you can see here, ISO, NIST, and others, some of which we obviously have certifications for, some of which are not certified, but based on certain standards. And then we do, where possible, certify them through those independent audits that I mentioned. You can see here at the privacy level, we certified a British standard 10,012, but GDPR is foundationally what we are building a lot of our data protection management system upon. Of the audit and compliance level, again, you can see that we have SOC 1 Type 2, SOC 2 Type 2s. We have a number of industry standards, and we also have a number of ongoing assessments from an application penetration perspective, and we'll share a little bit more about that as well. And Pete, if you can go to the next slide, you can actually see all of this as a customer by solution or by platform, and either download or request the different certifications or audit reports anytime yourself on what we call the SAP Trust Center. You can see the link right here. And this is a public site. It not only provides access to our certifications, but you can take a look at those different contractual components, including the data processing agreement, the technical and organizational measures that I mentioned, as well as find information on some process-oriented items like the secure development lifecycle, data protection measures, a whole host of other items. And so this is kind of the one-stop shop, or your first stop, I guess I should say, in starting to answer that question: how do we know that SAP has the right measures in place to protect our data and our systems as an organization? And then the other site that I'll point you to over on the right-hand side here for understanding more about the security processes and measures is what we call My Trust Center. And this you do need an ID for, but any customer or partner should be able to access that by creating an ID. And this contains more documentation on things like what are our encryption measures and standards across all the different cloud solutions? What is our incident management process and breach notification process? How do we handle vulnerability and patch management processes? There's a whole host of other security related items. You can download these for any time off that you have during the holiday season if you're looking for some extra reading. But really, we're really trying to strive to be as transparent as possible with our security and data protection measures in the cloud, obviously without compromising the security and integrity of it, but making sure that customers can have confidence in what we're doing through sharing information about our processes, about our approaches, about our standards, and then obviously validating them through third-party assessments. And so for some of you, this may not be as critical as you're not involved in evaluating third-party risk, but in every single cloud contract that we sign, the security organization is asking questions about these areas. And we want to make sure that you know, and then you can communicate to them if you're not part of that team, that this information is readily available, and that we are really here to help you interpret it or dig in further for your organization to have some additional questions. So when you get down to it, what does this all mean when we look at secure operations? So you may have seen this slide or some depiction of it before. It's something that our teams use pretty frequently to focus more on the security, the operational aspects of security, the tasks that a customer has to take into account to operate and maintain their systems in a secure manner. And it starts from the bottom. So we look at the environment layer, which is really more focused on the non-SAP technical infrastructure, things like network zoning, segmentation, the use of network components like routers and firewalls and the web application filters. And then it also includes the operating system and database security, client security. When I say client security in this context, I mean client-side controls like secure configuration of the client, execution rules for browsers, things like that. We then move up to the system layer. This serves as the foundation on which all SAP applications run, system hardening, securing SAP code, and in this sense, the code that SAP actually delivers, so considering processes like patch management, and then security monitoring, again, at the application layer. And then the application layer itself is all about the controls available in standard applications and the process that has to be built around them. Identity management, authorization and single sign-on, or hopefully by this time, multi-factor authentication mechanisms. A solid security structure as it relates to roles and authorizations, and a process that evaluates custom codes for security vulnerabilities before you're promoting them to production. I think this is probably the layer that most of us work in and day out. But when looking at it holistically in terms of a secure environment, it's just one very important, but still just one component of the whole picture. Moving up, when we get to the process layer, this deals pretty significantly with compliance, regulatory compliance, data protection, audit and fraud management. The objective here is really to have the right application behavior as it pertains to the policies or legal demands that are associated with the different jurisdictions or industry requirements in which your SAP solutions operate. And then finally, the organizational layer. So the people aspect of the secure operations map. And here, general awareness of security measures enterprise-wide, excuse me, is really emphasized. So this is one way that we look at the fundamentals, and again, as a reference model to structure discussions for a holistic view on security. And I've included the link here at the bottom of the slide. I hope that you can use this within your teams as you're evaluating the overall health of your environment, and then also planning, perhaps as you're moving to the cloud, moving to S4 HANA, or just generally looking critically beyond just the application layer. But Pete, if you can go to the next slide. I think what's important though is, again, given that we're talking about RISE with SAP, is to look at this through the lens of managed cloud in general. And what you'll notice right away is these responsibilities are split. And in many cases, different components, if you will, are owned or shared between the customer, the cloud service provider, or managed service provider, and system integrators where they're also involved. So I'm not going to go through each of these pieces in detail, but I think an easy example that we are all likely familiar with is at the application layer and in talking about user and identity and single sign-on. So when it comes to access and authorization, we look at it from two angles, right? We look at customer access and then administrative access by the cloud service provider personnel. So in the case of SAP, we have strict policies, strict procedures around access and change management, segregation of duties, least privileged access, all the things that you would hope we do, as well as multi-factor authentication. And you can review our policy and our access and change management guides. Again, they're on that My Trust Center site that I said, and then we regularly test them as part of our SOC audits. But granting user access and in general, user management for the customer users or the customer's customer, where that's applicable in a cloud infrastructure, that's the responsibility of the customer, as is authentication. So for this reason, these blocks at the application layer are shared responsibilities, and as a customer, it's important that you're looking at it in this manner. That's just one example, obviously, at the application layer, but when you're considering the secure operations, again, we have that general lens, which is more toward what a customer will be doing, when managing the entirety of it. You want to make sure that you're looking at those same components, but through the lens of the partners that you're joining, whether it's through RISE or another managed cloud environment, and how all of these are handled, how these different components are handled, and how you're getting the confidence that the right controls are in place to help you meet whatever internal or external demands that you have. Excuse me, Pete, can you go to the next slide? So at a high level, you can see the responsibilities that fall on SAP as the provider and then on the customer. And if I had to break it down, and again, I'm just going to highlight the customer areas on this side because I have more detail on the next as it relates to SAP. It's this. The security and compliance considerations of the application layer, again, identity management, authentication, application user ownership or security audit logging, change management, all of these things remain the responsibility of the customer in the RISE private cloud. And many of the processes that you're running today from an on-premise perspective have to continue, and in a lot of cases, it's in the same vein for the most part. Again, you just need to adapt and verify where change may be a requirement. And then in a private RISE environment, SAP takes on all of these things on the left, for which the next slide, Pete, if you can go to, hopefully is a better depiction of this. So these are some of the security features that SAP provides in a private cloud environment. Starting from the top, security monitoring. In this context, again, we're talking primarily at the infrastructure layer. Application security monitoring remains the responsibility of the customer, but we can certainly help here, and Pete is going to touch on, from a solution perspective, some of how we can do so. Going around the clock, vulnerability management, in terms of not only ongoing asset management, but security patch management, which can be a challenge for many customers. And then the strategy of how and when in the private cloud patching is done certainly in close collaboration with the customer. When we move over to threat detection, we have EDR, SOAR, malware management, and then immutable backups are on the roadmap, but not long off. When it comes to secure operations, we've talked about access and change management, but we also have regular third-party penetration tests and make summary reports available to customers. And as a customer, you also have the right to request a customer-led penetration test on a periodic basis. There's cloud security posture management, including hardening and scanning. And then finally, the network security components. And again, these are security features that at a high level, SAP provides in a private cloud, and you can learn a lot more about the process behind each of these on my Trust Center. But I hope this gives you an overview of what is needed to answer the question, how do we know that SAP has the right security measures, data protection measures, and people in place to give us confidence in their ability to manage this on behalf of the customer as we are looking to partner in a cloud environment. So Pete, if you can go to the next slide. Oh, that was a duplicate, it looks like. You go to that next slide. Here we go. We're going to talk a little bit now about some of the key security and control considerations when moving to S/4HANA. You can go to the next slide there. So again, Rise with SAP has different models, including the move of ERP to the cloud, a move to S/4HANA public cloud, or the private cloud model. And when we're focusing on private cloud. And so this is the architectural view that I'm going to use to cover this topic at just a high level before I pass it off to Pete. So if you consider SAP Business Suite today, it's fairly straightforward. We have a database, could be any database. We have the Business Suite itself, and then we have client access through SAP GUI or Web GUI. When we move over to S/4HANA, whether it's on-premise or in a private cloud environment, there are more architectural components to consider, which drives the need for a conversation around the security of those components, right? We need to consider the configuration of the gateway or the front-end server and application UIs. We need to consider secure web access or extensions and applications into the cloud. There are mobile capabilities and web ports and a whole host of items that allow you to leverage the business technology components for extensions, the Fiori Launchpad, and other application services. And each of these needs to be evaluated for security considerations as you even integrate perhaps with other on-premise or cloud applications and expose this to your end users. In addition, custom code, again, doesn't go away. And hopefully you have a process in place, or will be putting a process in place to analyze custom code for vulnerabilities prior to promoting to production. But I wanted to touch specifically on the user authorizations piece, as when you're in project planning mode, regardless of how much transformation, I use transformation in quotes here, you take on during your move to S/4HANA, there will be changes to your authorization structure that need to be considered. And there's really three buckets, I guess, of security considerations when you're moving to the S/4HANA landscape, and they fall under the S/4 application itself, Fiori and mobility, and then the HANA database piece. So when it comes to the S/4 application itself, there are a number of new transactions to access things through, some of the newer requirements like business partners, for example. But there's new transactions, new programs, new authorizations. There's also some decommissioned functionality. And then we need to consider, how users are accessing the application and what the integration with Fiori may do to your authorization structure and how you grant users access to these different various applications. Fiori does have, its own front-end user accounts and authorizations. And so there's a security model that has to be taken into consideration, and then the combination of your Fiori access and your backend access as well. And as you're thinking about the different ways that your users access the system and the different components of the systems that they use, think about it not only in terms of how you're building your authorization structures and how you're building your overall security model, but then also the implications on perhaps your SAP access control environment and the rule sets that you use to manage segregation of duties or sensitive access. All of these things need to be taken into consideration from a planning perspective to make sure that security doesn't get left behind as it relates to end users accessing the application. And then there's also the HANA component. So there's a non-ABAP security model that's managed through privileges on the HANA side. And so depending upon your use of HANA and your use cases of HANA beyond just the S4 HANA landscape, perhaps, you need to understand some of the data security measures from a role design perspective as well as an encryption perspective that may have an impact on your overall security controls framework, and that you need to either understand how and whether there is a change, and then what that change perhaps may be. So again, regardless of how much transformation you are doing in your move to S4HANA and in your move through RISE, I think make sure that you are adequately planning for the security topic and the different security considerations on your side as a customer, but also really thoroughly understanding what SAP is doing, leveraging some of the resources that I went through, either leveraging the secure operations map to guide the conversation, or leveraging all the material that we make available in the Trust Center and My Trust Center to really understand our process and make sure that you have the confidence that you need there. So Pete, I think if we go to the next slide, I'm going to pass it off to you to walk through how some of the solutions that we offer can also help, whether it's through SAP or partners.
Yes, thank you, Erin. So just like Erin said, so SAP has many solutions in this area that can help across that secure operations map that Erin covered a few slides back. When we talk about these solutions at SAP, they're really broken down into, in this space, it's 4 buckets. We really are going to concentrate, I think, in the middle 2 here, talking about security in that application layer, the process layer, and in some times the system layer, right? But from an overall GRC standpoint, we've got many solutions in enterprise risk and compliance bucket that help customers manage risk, manage controls, all based on regulatory requirements, right? We talked about looking for potential fraud at the application layer. We've got a solution that helps screen third parties to make sure that we're doing business with the correct entities, and also be able to detect anomalies, potential anomalies and fraud at the business layer. And then kind of wrapping that area out is a solution that helps from an audit standpoint manage that internal audit process. We kind of wrap that all into solutions or a concept called 3 lines of defense, right? Or financial 3 lines of defense that kind of complete that compliance bucket. More, I think, in the green area, the identity and access governance, more around the application layer security. I'm sure you're all familiar with some of the key solutions in here, but it's around how we manage access across the enterprise, right? Not just managing the identities and provisioning that access across those 3 different layers that Erin was mentioning, right? Fiori, the application, and HANA, but also being able to measure for risk to make sure that, what is the potential, what can I do within the system, right? So segregation of duty. We've got a single sign-on solution for that multi-factor authentication. And then you can have, with our partner Pathlock, a solution that can help automate the mitigation of those SOD risks with a kind of a risk assessment and monitor the financial impact of that potentially. Under cybersecurity data protection, this is more of that system monitoring, right? And some of the custom code. But how do we help manage potential cyber threats, whether they be internal internal or external, into our SAP system? How can we monitor the SAP logs? We've got some solutions that I'll cover briefly around that. And with all the regulations that Aaron was mentioning, GDPR and the British Standard and so forth, how do you secure the data in the files, right? And whether it be masking or logging that data as well. Not going to cover it today, but we've got a whole suite of products around international trade management. Now, what are these products that I'm referring to? When we talk about, again, I'm just going to concentrate in the middle. SAP Access Control, that's our true, fast, steady solution that manages or monitors for risk, right? Segregation of duties, critical risk within SAP. Our public cloud offering, Cloud Identity Access Governance, can do that for our SAP Cloud Solutions. We've got a great partner with Pathlock and Access Violation Management. There is, the two solutions here, the Integration Edition, which extends out SAP Access Control into whether it be SAP Cloud, non-ABAP solutions, but also to non-SAP solutions. So you really can have one standard SOD solution within access control, and then extend that out to any solution enterprise-wide. I mentioned single sign-on for that multi-factor authentication, and then we have the cloud solutions that help from a provisioning and authentication standpoint. Under the cybersecurity data protection, I mentioned how do we measure risk in the logs within the application layer and the functional layer. That's our enterprise threat detection. Very good at measuring a very large amount of data and doing the analysis, and there's a forensic lab in there and really understanding what type of behavioral activity could be happening at that application layer, not just at the functional SAP, but also within the database and Fiori tiles as well. I'm going to mention UI masking, right, and UI logging. That's really how we're helping to hide the data that we need to for those different privacy and data protection regulations like GDPR, like CCPA in the States, California Consumer Protection Act. We've got some solutions here also. I'm going to bop up on the top, SAP Data Custodian and the Data Custodian Key Management Service. Now that our data is in the cloud with SAP RISE, how do I know that it's sitting in the right cloud environment? How do I know that it's sitting in the right data or the infrastructure, right, into the right country, if you will? I can manage where my data sits. I can monitor where my data sits to make sure that I'm compliant from a regulatory. If it needs to be in the EU, if it can't leave Canada, if it can't leave the US, we can monitor where that data is sitting within the different infrastructures that is sitting in. We talked about custom code security, right? Or, the SAP code is going to be secure, the delivered, but if you modify that, how can I measure that? We do that with Code Vulnerability Analyzer, fortified by Micro Focus, and so forth. So that is a very quick overview of the solutions, and I've kind of highlighted these 5 because I think any organization going from or going to start with the SAP RISE offering, I think these are pretty basic that you need to make sure that you look strongly at to help with that RISE journey. Now with that, I just kind of want to wrap it up and say thank you for having us today. We do want to open up it for questions before I turn it back over to Stephanie. But are there any questions? And again, I think you have to unmute yourself and we can entertain some questions here for either Aaron or myself.
So the questions are in the chat box. So if
we got them in the chat box, okay.
Yeah. Anyway, if you have any questions, please add them now into the question box. It looks like we have one. It says, in your opinion, what should be the topics about awareness when moving to S4 HANA or RISE? Thank you for your presentation.
Aaron, would you like to tackle that one?
Again, the question was, what should be the topics about awareness when moving to S4 HANA or RISE?
So I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but I think when we're talking about awareness from a security perspective, I think going through the secure operations map and really making sure that organizationally you understand the roles and responsibilities between the different partners that are involved. And that also goes from an implementation perspective. I think that when we look at S4HANA implementations, in many cases there are multiple system integrators involved, for example. And we want to make sure that the roles and responsibilities, especially as it relates to security, are taken into consideration so that nothing falls through the cracks between the different parties involved.
And one thing I would add on that too is that make sure you engage SAP or the partner on this security topic early. Don't wait till you're almost going to either sign the deal or move after you've done that and are planning it. Have the security conversation early and often.
Okay, great. Thank you both for that answer. Again, if anyone has any questions, you can just add them to the question box and we'll try to get to those. As a reminder, in the chat, I put a link to pathlock.com-innovation-series, and that will take you to the schedule for the Pathlock Innovation Series. This session was one of the sessions that we're doing today for the Pathlock Innovation Series. Our next session that we have coming up will be, one second. How to identify true SOD risk with advanced quantification analysis. And that will be with our partner Protiviti. And so if you would like to attend that session, please click on the link in the chat and you can go register for that. Okay, I think that's all the questions we had for today. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Peter, for your presentation. And we hope to see everyone at future webinar events.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks.